Hey everybody, Courtney here from DePaul University. Welcome to episode 7 of EGF Leads. We're excited today to talk to you a little bit about facilitating community meetings back on your respective campuses. So as we get going here, we're going to start off with introductions. So Tyler, I'm going to turn it over to you first to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Tyler Schrodt. I'm the founder of the Electronic Gaming Federation. My role is helping to run the league that all of our schools are a part of. And my role in the community leadings is that I spend most of my time making sure that information gets out to all of our members, that we're actively engaging everybody and asking for feedback, and trying to make sure that everyone feels like their voices are heard. So thank you for having me.
Great. I'm sure a lot of people, Tyler, students especially, have seen your Discord messages, so they're probably happy to see you face to face for the first time here.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for all of us.
Yeah. All right, Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Tom Zdanowski, and I'm a senior at DePaul University, majoring in computer science. And so throughout my time here at DePaul, I've been here pretty much since the program has started. I founded the DePaul Overwatch club, and then facilitated its operations over the last 4 years. And along that road, also, essentially over time, we've eventually transitioned over to DePaul FPS, which I'm currently leading, and it's basically our hub for the FPS genre games that DePaul Esports competes in. And I'm also a member of the DePaul Esports leadership team, and so you'll see me handling anything competitive oriented here at DePaul.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And Kason.
Hey folks, my name is Kason Padilla. I'm a recent graduate of the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and I do program leading, and my current focus has been the Valorant program here at the university. I'll run things from community events to the meetings we'll be talking about to sort of guiding direction for where the program as a whole will be going. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Great. Yeah, thanks for joining. So for our viewers, throughout today's talk panel, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. We can see those as we're talking and are happy to answer them live on screen. So, for those of you tuning in, you might be wondering what exactly we're talking about when we're talking about community meetings here. So community meetings are the community building side of what we do in esports. We know that our students are doing a lot of, pickup games, matches, things like that. But community buildings are a spectacular way that you can continue to bring your students together over a common interest across titles and for that common interest. So today we're doing a deep dive into how you can effectively manage community meetings and just talking a little bit about lessons that we've learned as well. So as we kick it off here, I'm curious if our panelists can talk a little bit about why you initially decided to host community meetings for your specific community. And Kason, if it's okay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think we recently realized that a lot of our games are sort of in their own corners. We've got Overwatch, Valorant, Rocket League, etc., and they sort of stay in those corners. And we wanted to encourage people to sort of be UH Esports as a whole. And so we started doing community events more on the regular, whether that's, playing more casual games like Among Us or just updating our players and staff members as to what the next projects we're doing. It makes the group as a whole feel really like a community, and people appreciate that, and I think they also just enjoy being able to see their peers, especially because we're all, for the most part, at home right now.
Yeah, and I guess if you're done, I could go ahead. Here at DePaul, the reason why we kind of host our community meetings is primarily to communicate with the majority of our program. We have actually had like a gaming community here at DePaul prior to DePaul Esports Foundation 4 years ago. And essentially what ended up happening is we have one central DePaul Esports Discord, but we also have like a disjoint kind of set of communities like FPS, League of Legends, Rocket League. So there's like a lot of necessity to kind of like relay message throughout our community, whether it be in the main DePaul Esports Discord and the variety of others. So what we essentially aim to do is give our students updates on how our teams are doing, what community things we're trying to do. Like you just said, like if there's ever like anything to do with Among Us for those of our students who are casual, there's always an opportunity. Or even like partnerships and big things that are happening, like, you know, EGF playoffs, the Big East, and so many other things. And just to add another note is like, given DePaul's like schedule and like how many teams we have and all these things, the way that we facilitate our meetings is like, it's like the esports leadership team and anyone that we will invite that join us. But realistically, having one big meeting, which like I would love to have, but it's just so hard to align all of the schedules. So that's the format that we choose to take.
I think from the league side, we looked at it as an opportunity to start decentralizing some of the way that we manage things, because we went through progress of like how we managed events and the company overall and how we interacted with schools as being very like EGF led when we were just starting, and especially when we were working with just students. And then as we progressed over time and started to involve administrators, the idea was we wanted to make sure that one, the decisions that were most impactful to the schools were made by the schools, and that as we were going through a lot of very painful early lessons about how to make sure that all of our schools were prepped to do whatever they needed to do at whatever time it was, that some of the communications that we've been trying before, which, you know, like would be an email or a Discord message or something like that, just weren't effective enough to get engaged commentary back or conversation. Excuse me. And then when we were trying to make updates and, you know, keep people involved and, you know, have retention rates season to season, that became a really big focus of how we ran those. So now we try to segment between the information that has to go to administrators, so everybody knows what's happening there, what's happening with all of our students. So we always have direct contact with our players and know what's going on there. And then obviously that we're telling them all the same stuff that we do everywhere else. And then for everything else, it becomes more specialized, kind of like what Tom was saying with their different communities. The ability to, you know, cater that message, change the format of the meetings a little bit, and then ultimately, you know, hope that everybody gets to where they need to go in the end.
Yeah, well, and Tyler, I think that there was a phrase that you used in there that I really appreciated about engaged commentary with members. Like community meetings gives you that opportunity. And I think Kason and Tom talked a little bit about this, of like the somewhat disjointed nature that can sometimes exist within esports communities when everyone is off having their own games or their own teams, their own focus areas. The ability to bring people together in this engaged commentary is really, really important. And I think the other thing that you mentioned that was really critical is about retention, because you're trying to retain members, but we at schools, either in our program or for the university ourselves, are trying to retain students, right? And engaging in these community meetings is a way that people feel more connected, which leads to that sense of retention, which I think is really, really important. But Tom started to allude to it a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about formats, right? So what formats did your community meetings initially take, and have they changed over time? I think particularly, I think that this could be an interesting question, given that if you had any meetings before the pandemic and then during the pandemic, I'm just curious if people can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. I could start on this. So as far as like community meetings, actually, I'll start before the pandemic. But as far as I remember, before the pandemic, the main meetings we would have would be like probably events. But when it comes down to like actual meetings with like an agenda and so on, right? I believe that we had one for those that were student leaders, and we would just meet in a room with like a projector and just talk about all the things that are like important for developing our program and so on. So I remember I believe we did that, I think 2 or 3 times. I think I had to miss one time. But yeah, that was like a really enjoyable thing. And like, especially since at that time we had, I believe, a student director, and then, you know, of course, the people leading each of the games. It was kind of a good format because the people that were leading each games don't really talk to each other as much as you might expect. So we felt like it was a really good way to like connect and share interest and like where we want to, what direction we want to take this thing. But as far as like we do it now, given the pandemic time, we usually do it through this very similar format that we're in right now in StreamYard, right? And we have our esports student leadership team. We create an agenda of basically the majority of the things throughout the month that have been important, mostly consisting of team updates, as we have like over 10 teams and over 100 students competing. And of course, we also have things related to any community events we're doing, partnerships, big events, and so on. And we usually try and invite anyone that's open or available during that time to see if there's anything more interesting that we can talk about, since we are kind of just like the messengers or the liaisons. We don't necessarily know the full picture of everything that's happening around the community. So we feel like that invitation is very, reforms a lot of what the meeting could look like. And I have something else to comment about, but I'll let you guys go first, because it's not. Yeah,
and Tom, actually, if I can interject for a second,
right.
It's funny to hear you talk about what meetings were like on campus, because I remember those meetings and we had more of them and students weren't showing up. Like yeah. We would have, 5, 6 people sometimes at our community meetings. And we had, when our gaming center is open, we have 1,300 students who use our facility. So we were seeing 5 or 6 people, right? So those numbers, it was not equitable or like a good ratio at all for who was actually coming to our community meetings. But I think in the pandemic and figuring out, like you're talking about, figuring out how to stream our community meetings has been a game changer, I think, in terms of engagement, because, just like we have here, like we can see the chat, we can see what people are talking about, they can ask questions, they can interact. The other thing that's really nice is it's available as a video on demand. So now suddenly, if people can't make the in-person meeting, they can watch the recording and they can see it. And I know I've had a lot of students who have followed up with me for questions of like, hey, I heard about this in the recording, can you tell me a little bit more about it? Or they'll see something on social media that we said, like, hey, I heard that you talked about this at the meeting, and we'll give them the minute marker of where they can learn more. So I think, I imagine, at least for DePaul, even when we go back to a more robust on-campus experience, we probably will still continue to do our community meetings virtually here on StreamYard, or through StreamYard to Twitch and Facebook and YouTube. We send it to 3 different locations, but I think it's been a real game changer in terms of how we can connect our community in these discussions.
I think that's a great point. And for us, because we've always been separated from everybody that we bring to these meetings, most of the time they're virtual. Excuse me. Although I definitely remember times when phone calls were more common. So the fact that video is more normalized now is really nice, because having that face-to-face, well, as close to face-to-face as you can, definitely makes things feel a lot more substantive. And because we've always been sort of in the same format, I think our focus internally has always been, how do we make the meetings interesting enough and engaging enough that people want to show up to them? And then when you're there, understanding that, especially when we're talking about students that have really busy, academic lives or otherwise, administrators, that, this is one meeting out of like 100 that they have that week, that you have to make use of, the 30 or 40 minutes that you might have with them. So our formats, I think, have shifted a little bit from what I think we could probably kindly describe as like me rambling on in the earlier days, for things where, I was just trying to get points across and, be what I thought was great, but not very, to looking at everything from the structure of the agenda to how other people are invited into it. So it's not always just me talking at people. And then trying to ensure that everyone, whether we were explicit about what the bullet items were or not, were kind of bought into the same system and the same format. So they know, like, all right, we're going to focus on these couple of things. We're going to have an open discussion. It's okay to, express thoughts and opinions in these areas, but also to avoid things like what I remember being on campus and our like fraternity meetings, and we'd have meetings that went from like a 6-item thing on the agenda to like a 4-hour conversation, because everyone felt the need to just reiterate the same points over and over again. which I'm thankful we have not run into all that frequently. But just trying to think about like all these different ways that things have evolved over time, make sure that they're interesting, that they flow, that they're efficient, and that you're getting as much density into it. And then when we're talking with our students, it's more like, understanding that attention spans are not super high. And it's like everybody just hanging out in a call to hear a lot of the same things that they hear every week, just to make sure that that's like drilled into their head. And everybody feels good about that, but try not to make it super dry and boring every week. And so we always are thinking about those formats and how to get better. And I know for the next year, our goals are to think more about how do you incentivize more people to be at all those meetings, to make sure that if they can't be there, whether it's a scheduling or otherwise, like you were talking about, Courtney, making sure that, everything that you talked about is available, that you're still encouraging like that post-meeting interaction. And then like we're trying to get better at understanding what disincentivize someone from participating, whether it's like a scheduling problem or if they're not getting the information they need or something like that as well. And it's a chaotic like anxiety that I have to try to do the best we can with that and understand that it doesn't always work out just that way.
Yeah, I think that that transition you're talking about from pre-pandemic to now is really interesting, in that it made me remember just like this distant memory of getting food so our students would be more interested to come to meetings, and having sort of that space to have these meetings. Our place is called the iLab, and back in the day before the pandemic, it wasn't just our space; it was shared through like other clubs and such. And I remember that was like sort of a big fight for us, is having that like consistent area that their students know they can turn to if they want to participate in the esports side of things. Now we have these discords that are they've sort of become this central hub for not just meetings, but for hangout spots for your teams, for your community members, for everybody. And I think that post pandemic, fingers crossed that that's sort of coming up in this next year or so, is how do we transition our students back into the mindset of, oh hey, we've got this space. How do we consistently bring them into it? And I think that's going to be an interesting topic in the next 6 to 12 months.
Well, and Kason, I think that even brings up the topic then, and things for universities and student leaders to think about is like, when I am of the belief, I think, especially at a place like DePaul, space is going to be at a premium, right? So when you do bring people together, you want to bring them together intentionally and with purpose, and especially to do community building. I think if you're doing a lot of updates, I think it's something that you should think about. Like, could you do something streamed so that you're not taking away from space? Because if your meeting, like Tyler said, if your meeting is updates, or if that's all you're doing, think about a different format, especially if you are going to be limited for space. Because when you are in person, you want to get back to that. You want to get back to that community building. And I love that you talk about pizza and food, because I think that is something that like brings people together, right? And it sounds silly, but there's a reason that people talk about the value of baking or breaking bread with one another, right? So I think that there's a lot of value that we can have with people intentionally thinking about what they do with their time when they get back together.
I'm kind of curious from all of you, what, as you're thinking about that transition, when the choice between like spending the time to go to a physical place, and obviously like that includes travel time and having to like get out of bed or get dressed and all those types of things that even I sometimes am not all that motivated to do. Do you think about like specific tactics that make that possible? Because like Courtney, as you were talking, it made me think of all those memes about like, hey, this could have been an email. And so I was just kind of curious if there's any specific things that you see as sort of like a silver bullet in those types of areas, or is it really just as simple as, like, hey, there's free food and it's definitely worth coming to just see people's smiling faces today?
Well, the thing that I always think about, and I mean, my major hat that I wear is from a student involvement perspective. I always think that if you're going to bring people together in person, the meeting and the content needs to be robust enough. It needs to be longer than it's going to take for them to travel to get there. And that includes like traveling on your way there and traveling home. And especially for us at DePaul in the city of Chicago, you know, most of our students are either taking the train, they're traveling from the suburbs. So some of them are commuting 25, 30, 50 minutes to get to school. So when you're going to bring them together in person, you have to have like that really strong reason. And community meetings could be it, but I think that they have to be, I think it goes back to what Tom talked about early on about, pretty sure, I don't remember when we were talking about it. Like it has to have a true benefit for people, and they have to feel that sense of connection. They're not going to just go and sit somewhere with updates, because they will do that once and then they'll never come back again. Right. So if you're going to like require them, you know, if they live 25 minutes away, let's say, if you're going to require them to travel 50 minutes to get there, why you are bringing them there has to be really good. I don't think that post-pandemic that pizza is going to be the answer, right? Like pizza or like a giveaway. I think it has to be more meaningful than that. Like they have to feel that sense of connection, because they have been doing so many things virtually for this past year. Also, Kason, that puppy is so cute.
Oh, thank you. To go off your point though, really quick, I totally agree that, well, one, that pizza isn't the answer anymore, but that people should have a reason. You know, you don't want to come off feeling, or you don't want your community feeling like you don't value their time as well, right? And so, you know, the updates in Discord and such are great. However, I think there's also another side to that coin where we also want at least our community leaders, their voices to feel heard. And it's easy to kind of slip out of having any sort of consistent meetings, like we've personally felt in this past semester, where again, you know, people start to move and stay into their corners of their games or their friend groups or what have you. And so I think finding that balance, thinking back to earlier on, maybe, you know, when the pandemic was just starting, I feel like we were like, okay, we need to be consistent, which in my mind felt like we need to have all of these meetings like all of the time, you know, weekly meetings with everybody and just give them all the updates. And I quickly found out that, you know, if you sort of spam these meetings with your students, they end up not wanting to be there, especially if there isn't really like a great reason for it. And so I think defining what consistent means for your own community is super important, because it's important to be consistent, but it's also important to, again, value the time of your students for sure.
Yeah, so I'm curious, you know, shifting gears here a little bit. I know all of the three of you have had a lot of experience at this point with community meetings. So I'm curious if, you know, looking back, what's something you wish you would have known about facilitating community meetings prior to starting them?
I think everything that we're talking about right now would have been really nice. And coming in with the main understanding that the way that I think about information is not the same as everybody else's. And so I think the best lesson that I learned was like just agenda structuring, because being able to say, hey, today we're going to focus on these types of things, and then pre-prepping all of the people that are participating by saying, we're going to do updates and that'll be a short part of the meeting. Then there's going to be a discussion about things and like progress of what's happening. And then we're going to talk about like how we structure our admin meetings as like new business, and trying to seed that idea in previous meetings or in emails to say, this is a discussion we want to have. So like, think about this ahead of time, come prepared with thoughts. And then, you know, we're going to set this goal outcome of making a decision on these things, or we're going to progress into this next stage. And I think in most of the meetings that we've done, that's helped us think a lot more long-term, because we have to plan in that advance. And I hope that it's been a better experience on the administrators, at least, because now we can kind of see like the bigger picture of how things are going. And then understanding that if we can get through something really quickly, especially when we're doing like check-in meetings for players, to not feel like we have to reiterate everything all the time, because we can trust that people kind of know what's going on most of the time.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to bounce off of what you just talked about, actually, in two ways. One with like agenda structuring and etc. I think that for our meetings, I feel a lot more comfortable knowing that, okay, we have this agenda planned. We can add on to it as things happen throughout the week, going up to the meeting, right? We can kind of like know that we've covered everything that our community wants us to cover, and kind of just be prepared to talk about all these things, but not like structure the meeting fully. Like a meeting, I feel like, is never like well planned out if it's like full. Like, okay, sorry, I need to rephrase this, but I think
if it's scripted,
right? I think
Yeah.
free flowing meetings are just so much better than anything scripted. And for me, in order for me to have like a nice, comfortable, free flowing meeting, I need to know everything that we're talking about prior. But like, I don't need all the specifics, right? I just need like to know exactly what's happening. And sorry, I'm kind of like switching to a different topic, but because Tyler, for you as like a tournament organizer, tournament admin, right? I feel like there's a lot of like students that are involved in a lot of competition, and it's very hard to keep track of things sometimes. So like for me, I don't know, I guess for me, the way I think about it is like, I need like an info tab where like, oh, here I can find quick links, like stuff like that. And like I don't know, I guess like like an announcement channel that like kind of helps me to kind of be in the loop about like the global things, but then also things that are specific to like maybe, I don't know, Overwatch or Rocket League or etc. Because for me, I feel like students, they might look lazy to like tournament organizers sometimes, but I feel like they just have so much going on and they're like lost and stuff like that. And like, yeah, I don't know. It's a very hard thing, I think, to try to organize a tournament and have everything going as everyone would like it. But there's always research as an opportunity to try and find out what the best way might be.
Yeah, no, I totally see your point. And I think I get the comparison with tournaments, and community meetings are definitely a smaller thing in terms of the groups of people involved and everything. But the leaders of the tournaments or the meetings or whatever totally should be prepared for it. If we came on to this meeting even and didn't have our talking points, the free flowing conversation is great, but the talking points kind of guide where we want to go, right? And it's the same thing with whether you're doing a community building event. I remember doing a Valorant community night not too long ago, and we've tried them in the past, but it's a naturally sort of sweaty competitive game, and so we were thinking of ways to make it more inviting for casual players, and we ended up doing like a sort of like fun strats from a hat thing where it doesn't really matter how good you are if you can only use a pistol with like one bullet or what have you, then it sort of evens the playing field, and that made people want to come back for more. And so being prepared in those sorts of ways, knowing your audience, I guess is what I'm trying to allude to here, is super important for anything. I think students want meetings to feel more free flowing, but as leaders, we know that behind the scenes they can't be, right? And so finding that balance is kind of a beautiful thing, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, and if I can add to that, I think the other thing that I would say like is something to know is it is not always natural for people to have things be free flowing. Like especially I think with what we're doing at DePaul with our community meetings and live streaming. Like I remember the first one we did with Tom and two of our other students, Alex and Matt. They were very nervous, and like we use like a Google slide deck. They wrote out everything and they were reading it, and it was like that scripted version, like what Tom was talking about. And it's just not natural sometimes to like get in front. So whether it's in person, streamed, whatever it might be, people are going to be nervous. So there is an art to learning to like be natural when you see a live button, or if you're standing behind a podium, whatever that might look like. The other thing that I think like that I personally found interesting, and Tyler, you used a phrase earlier that I connected with a little bit. I think the other thing about esports, you use the phrase like face to face for meetings. I think that this community doesn't have to have face-to-face interactions to still feel connected, right? Like esports is that one part of our collegiate experience that they truly are still building relationships without necessarily seeing somebody's face. So, I think in a lot of other meetings, people are like, oh, everybody turn your camera on. But I have students at DePaul who have, until I posted a team roster with all of their pictures, they had never actually seen what some of their teammates looked like, yet they still felt connected. So I think that's one of the other things that I wish I would have known before we started all of this. Like, I think I was really pushing, like, we have to have everybody on with cameras on because, like, it's what we do in fraternity and sorority life and SGA and all these other places, like, because that's an essential part of their relationship building. But esports is a little bit different in that context.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I still have a lot of anxiety when we get to do like in-person events again, and then all these names that I'm used to seeing like week in, week out, and then see them in person and be like, I have no idea who you are. So,
or you're going to see them with a mask on, so you can only see their eyes now.
So you'll have to. That's a great reason to have name tags, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think that it's really interesting, and like because we also see a lot of that interaction between teams, where a lot of them won't ever meet in person, or I mean, obviously they hope in championships or whatever, but it's the same story that I've experienced in gaming forever, as I'm sure everybody else has, where you can be really close to someone in the sense of camaraderie and familiarity and comfort without really having to go that far. And it's definitely been difficult for me to think how to like reconcile the two parts of my philosophy on that kind of thing, because in one sense I love working in person with people and like having that additional level of connection, but at the same time I just mentioned that since I've played video games online, like I've been totally used to seeing the same people and interacting and having that level of fraternal bond with them, I guess, without ever having that. So it's been, especially over this last year, trying to converge those two ideas and try to figure out what's the best way to keep people engaged, understand that there's different comfort levels on what people want to, or how they want to engage. And then at the same time, measure the level of like real engagement and understand if something like that is one of the levers that we can pull, or if it's something about the structure or any number of other things that can impact everything from what we were talking about, attendance to engagement to even just like retaining the information that they're getting. Because I've certainly learned that not everybody wants to read or listen at the same time. And so there's a lot of different ways that you have to comfortably, but without being annoying, introduce information over and over again and hope that it gets through. So these are all things that I hope to find answers to at some point. But I think at this point, it's just a lot of experimentation, because the human factor in all this makes it really difficult to say this is like the solution that we're going to use and make that consistent over time.
Yeah, and I think that to add on to that, I have like 3 things to talk about. But with Discord, right? Like, if you're gonna ping people and like they're always gonna give you those ping sucks, but like I don't know, it's just like it's very hard to know how people use Discord, because I don't know if you know this, but like I know at least 3 people that use Discord completely different ways. I'm one of them, and like so like with that, like how do you know the majority, right? And like how do you like address this kind of like your audience in a fashion that works for everyone, right? And it's like very hard, and there's a lot to keep up with, and people are parts of different communities, so like they have to like choose, oh, do I want to interact with this one more or this one, right? And it's very hard to see everything. It's like going on Twitter and seeing all of your timeline. It's like impossible for some people, but I think it's just like a very hard thing, and I've been trying to work through it too, by like potentially not pinging people as much and only ping for the big things, trying to kind of relay events in like an event channel, keeping it there, and a variety of other things. But yeah, it's a very challenging thing, and I think that only, like you said, just trying things, learning from them is like the best way to approach it. And I just wanted to talk about like the face-to-face thing. Like during the pandemic, we actually had someone join our Overwatch team. His name is Mo, and I've become really good friends with this guy, but I've never met him, right? But like that isn't always the case. I think that with the pandemic, this remote environment, and esports, like your statement, Courtney, of esports not necessarily needing the face-to-face connection, I think that's true, but I also think that it adds on to it. I think that with a team environment, you are much more likely to become like toxic, or like even like less united if you're not meeting as a team. Like our current varsity Overwatch team has never met like in person. Like I don't think anyone besides like maybe me and one other person have met, and it's like it takes an impact on the team synergy, right? Like there's no physical like kind of like understanding of like who we are. What, like we just know each other's voices, we know each other's like maybe personalities through like our gameplay, but like that factors are really missing, and I think that collegiate is losing out as a result, because of this factor, right? And I think that um like even for us, like I know that like 2 years ago when we were an Overwatch team, we didn't really practice in the center all the time because there wasn't like sufficient mouse space yet. So for some of our aimers, it wasn't really like a preference, but we would go once in a while just for that physical, connection, despite preferring maybe like our home setup or something if it was like accessible, right? And I think that this really like I would have enjoyed our like it's like esports in person is just so like strong, like because everyone that plays esports always experienced it from home. So like the most enjoyable experience I probably had like initially from esports is when I went to like I think Mad City Land 2 or like 1, and like I rang for this one guy. I think his name was like Smoke, and he's like with like the broadcaster for like the Valorant stuff now. I forgot, Nerd Street Gamers. Yeah. So it really like I went there, I saw like Winter Fox, all these other teams at the time, and this in-person esports situation, it was just like a dream. I don't know, like it was completely different from just matchmaking, right? And I don't know, it's just it takes it to the next level. So I really want to kind of like reiterate that with like, making it worth people's time. I think that with meetings, it really depends. But with like when it comes down to like involvement, community events, competition, I think it's just so much stronger in person.
Yeah. Tom, I would agree with that. We've been talking about that a lot in student involvement at DePaul, because we're referring to those as anchors, right? Like there are a lot of things that we have learned that we can do virtually, and especially in esports, right? Like this esports as an industry, it was easier to pivot for collegiate esports, I think, than a lot of other areas in college, but humans by nature still need those anchors. So I think, looking forward, we're going to see more collegiate programs that have obviously a few of those continued anchors that are meaningful in-person experiences. And then we continue to rely on some of these other virtual offerings for other engagement, right? Like Discord's not going to go away just because we're allowed to have a more robust on-campus experience, right? Like streaming isn't going to go away because we have a more people on campus. So I think it's balancing like those anchors and making, again, whether it's a community meeting, hangout, whatever it might be, making sure that has a meaningful experience and is worth the people's time to travel together, and then strategically planning things the other way, because I agree. I mean, well, in our office in Chicago, we've been bringing our team together just once a month, and honestly, we just do it because we see each other on video 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10 times a week, depending on what the week looks like. But there is a difference in our energy level. We do a lunch like once a month right now. And just the fact that we see each other face to face, everyone is just doing better, right? Like I think we all see like the light at the end of the tunnel. We feel that sense of connection, and we're all social distanced, but it makes a world of difference, I think, in our staff dynamics. And I think it's going to be similar for esports come the fall, when hopefully the pandemic starts to subside. So I know we've talked a little bit about some of the things that lessons we've learned, things that have gone well. If anybody has any other things that have gone exceedingly well, feel free to share them. But I also wanted to create a window of like, what's just bombed, right? Like what has been, you tried to do it and you just were like, this is not working at all. I'm curious if folks can share a couple lessons with our listeners.
Anything last minute.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a very common one. I think the other ones have been like going back to my time in residence life. It has been any time that there is like either unexpected or required like fun time, and there are good ways to do that. And like you're talking about all the like Kason's point about the casual Valorant modes and things that people would actually want to do. But I think that especially like pre-pandemic, there was a lot of, hey, we're going to spend some time on business, but we're also going to have fun. And that fun is like icebreakers or other things that just don't really hit with the audience. I mean, especially not to characterize all of the gaming community, but they tend to not want those types of social interactions as much. So I think the early days of me running meetings post residence life were a lot more in that mode before I realized that people were just giving me those looks of like, oh, they really mean when they say they don't want to do this. And so that was a good humbling lesson. And that is something that I still makes me anxious to do all those types of community events in that same way. So that's why we now just let students pick. It's way easier.
Yeah, for us, I think maybe it's not so much like a specific community meeting, but we all feel when the like flow of communication between the leaders has broken down. So one or two people might be on the same page about how this meeting is going to go, but if everybody isn't on that same page, then the meeting itself just really deteriorates. We've had a bit of that semi recently, and we're restructuring things to sort of kind of reinforce the group effort with our leaders, making sure that everybody's voices are heard and that everybody's on the same page for the smaller events even, so that we're for sure on the same page for when bigger things are coming up. Whether that's the return to being in person and really just anything. So, yeah.
That's great. And Kason, that actually brings me to my next question. You were talking a little bit about some of the other things that are non-community meetings. I'm curious, if folks can just share a little bit about some of those things that you're doing to build community outside of meetings. And then with those, how, if they aren't information-based, how do you continue to ensure that students get the information that they might need?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is content. So, it's totally fine, I think, that our Overwatch team and our League team aren't interacting regularly. They're all doing their thing. They're all still being students. They're all working through their own personal stuff during this pandemic. But doing content and having a content team has sort of kept everybody in the loop about the highlights that people are going through, whether it's just, having graphic designers for Twitter to post about our game updates, or having we did this past semester team showcases where we sort of introduce the players and see their faces and kind of show highlight clips about who they are and how they play their game, and sort of keeping that camaraderie and keeping that recognition of who these people are outside of their names and their usernames and their profile pictures has, I think, really kind of reinforced like, oh yeah, we're more than just the game we're playing. We're more than just our team name and that monthly meeting we do, right? I think posting content regularly and having people involved in ways maybe they're not comfortable with, but encouraging them and making it a positive experience has been, at least in our case, really a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add on, I think at some point today, we had talked about highlighting students and like their involvement in the teams. And I don't know, like I think that a lot of students want kind of that showcase, and like, when a roster gets announced, they want like at least like a graphic to like showcase each player, and maybe even like, like you have so many good moments and you have tools like, I don't know, maybe NVIDIA, I think Shadow Play, and then there's like, I think Steel Series something. They have their own software as well, and like I think there's others too where you can just like clip the best moments in your collegiate matches, right? Like there's so much content out there that like teams might have that like you can share with like your DePaul or like for your, in our case, like DePaul sports program, right? And like just make some kind of like cool like showcase of like, oh, here are some cool moments from like this week's of match, this month of matches or something like that, right? Because I think that for me, like the clips that we have from like our Overwatch collegiate involvement, they really speak a lot about like how we enjoy and like participate in like our collegiate esports involvement, right? And even to add on to that, like I don't know if you guys saw, but Overwatch League actually added like player cams, and like it's been like the most amusing thing I've ever seen. Like they're like they're getting like the most dramatic moments and the expression on the player's face. Like it's the perfect thing, and I can't believe no one has thought of it. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to share that because I feel like content, like you're saying, is very strong, and there's so many avenues you could take it, and there is like one route that I think a lot of people go with, right? And it's like highlights, player introductions, but there's so much more you could do too if you get like innovative. And this leads to another point that I was going to talk about the prior discussion for having a successful meeting. Like honestly, get innovative and make sure that people aren't like super busy or there's not conflicts. But yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add on because I felt like getting innovative with meetings so it kind of fits your audience and like getting the research done just so you know kind of what your audience is like really important. And I wish I knew how to do really, really good research on our community, but I have to say I don't. And I want to learn how to do that so I can understand them better, because I feel like my perspective is like just one perspective that might be pretty well informed in one specific thing, but I don't know the majority of our community members or the average of how they feel about everything that's happening.
I think that's a great point. We think a lot about that in when we're trying to not make everything about meetings, which has been like a progression of our role. And I think the other important thing, and maybe it applies to all of you, but for us, it's also kind of understanding what people want our role to be and to not like try to force something that people don't want from us. Because one, if we try to roll something out that no one wants, obviously no one's going to care about it, interact with it, and that is going to bomb. But we start to see like these organic things happen where like if we compare our high school community to our college community on Discord tends to be a lot of the teams interacting with each other for like scheduling purposes, or like there's an element of discussion about the game, and sometimes like some retrospective on it, talking back and forth to one another. In our high school Discord, we've seen that a lot of these players will start to interact with each other in very different ways. Like our Smash community will like organize their own friendlies every week, and they'll watch like whatever Smash streams are going together. And they watch like all the Overwatch League stuff together. And those aren't things that we prompt or encourage. They just kind of happen. So we're trying to figure out where are those places where we can add value without like preventing that organic thing from happening. And when we think about the college front, we're introducing like some new community events and stuff just based on what people had asked for. But we're also thinking about, like, is there a purpose to change something about our Discord to encourage more discussion, or to do more community nights that aren't just, showing up to check in for your matches before broadcast. It's trying to make sure that it's valuable. But Tom, to your point before, it's, like if everybody's using Discord in different ways, or obviously there's only so much time that they can dedicate it to Discord as a platform, are they going to make that choice to engage with us, or are they going to stay somewhere else? And, what's the right kind of like push-pull concept of how to introduce those things? And again, that's a lot of social anxiety for me to just like try those things and see if they work or not. But I think it's been really cool to just see how communities organically evolve, and then try to make sure that you support and foster those without crushing it, or all of a sudden making it seem like, it's like corporatized, even if that isn't a corporation doing it, and it's really interesting to watch that happen.
Yeah, and I think that the heroes in this case are probably those team captains that, you know, like they go out of their way and they're like, okay, like this is what I found out. If they found out, right? Hopefully they're finding out like what you're relaying and going like, all right, guys, here's what's happening. And they have like, I'm telling you, like sometimes we have to reiterate it like a few times, and like it's just like it's just like a flow chart of like, all right, Tyler, all right, Peyton, okay. This team player, okay. This team player hasn't been on all day. He didn't see it, so like it's just like, you know, like a flow chart with like every team, and yeah, it's just kind of like, I think honestly, for me, I always think about it. I'm like, okay, maybe simple is just the move, right? Like if things are simple, like nobody will ever get confused. But at the same time, you never know what will really like chime in with those people. And I also wanted to comment about like community building, because I feel like I've barely done that during this question, kind of. But like for me, I think that there's so much opportunity for community building as there is content, right? I'm going to talk about Overwatch in particular because it's kind of like what I've done the most in person, on campus, and remote. But for us, like we love the Overwatch League viewing parties, right? We would try to do them in like the DePaul Student Center with like a projector setup, and like I remember once we were on stream, so that was really cool. These pickup games, like we would try to do variations. Like I know, Kason, you said earlier that like, you know, like the pull a strat out of a hat thing. Like we love that too. And like in Overwatch, like we would revisit prior metas. Like, okay, we're only playing goats today, or like, oh my god, I just remembered we played. I'm not sure if you're familiar with goats, but it's like a very like kind of you're just calling one target all the time. We played goats, but everyone was in the same voice channel, both teams. And it was just the most ridiculous 20 minutes of my life, I think. But yeah, just like getting creative, and also like something that I really would love to see, because I personally love this, but like intercollegiate like pickup games. You know, like right now, I think a trend in the pro Valorant scene is a lot of pros are actually playing 10-mans, and they're learning so much from them, right? But like collegiate, like if a given league or, you know, some community gets together, they're like, okay, guys, like, you know, we as just DePaul, I'm just using DePaul as an example, can't get enough for Valorant pickup games this Friday. It's unfortunate. But, you know, if you take 5 universities, get all those student leaders on board, and then have like intercollegiate pickup games, the chances of those students enjoying that and that intercollegiate connection is like so much higher, right? It's hard to coordinate, but it's a potential, right? And I think that that is something great, because for me, I've met students at Waterloo, at UCI, at UCLA, at where else? Utah, all these other schools, right? And really, like I don't think I would have met them unless like I did like some hackathon or something otherwise, right? And I think that's like something valuable besides just like interacting with your own university, right? You have an opportunity for this collegiate networking that like hasn't, I think, existed on a scale prior. Because like if you think about like traditional sports, like you're interacting, right? And like it's kind of the same as like what's happening right now in esports, but like there was never like this like Discord chat type of sort of interaction with like others, and potential for even more interaction. Because, you know, if you face let's say DePaul basketball plays like University of Hawaii basketball, right? Like they're gonna compete, right? But then as far as like any other interaction goes, it's very hard to like kind of see where that might continue. And I think that that's something also valuable, and just community building outside of just like your own community, but like how you can interact with other universities as well.
Well, great. So if anyone in our audience has any questions, thoughts, things that you want to share before we wrap up, feel free to, again, to post them in the comments. We're happy to get them answered here. But just wanted to leave, final space for a wrap-up thought, or if there's anything that you wanted to share that you didn't have a chance to. So, Kason, if it's okay, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to piggyback off of kind of what Tyler and Tom were talking about earlier, in that I agree that, you know, content is a great thing, but I think knowing your audience is maybe number one priority in fostering a community and building it up. And that, you know, it's cool to be able to do like the team showcases that we did, but if we're trying to like really get on the content train, people might be discouraged and not want to do this or that. And, students are still living their own lives and going through their own stuff right now. And so I think making people feel safe and comfortable and pushing them in slight ways and encouraging them to do this or that to sort of step the bar up a little bit, but not forcing your community to, I guess in the way Tyler put it, like corporatize to really feel like you need to be doing X, Y, and Z for this to be successful. At the end of the day, this is an extracurricular for a lot of our students, right? I always feel like I'm tiptoeing on eggshells when I bring up money in collegiate, but at the end of the day, most of us aren't being paid for what we're doing, and that's the sad reality of our current situation. And hopefully, all of our community building and on a national scale leads to this being more of a fruitful environment, both for its players, staff, coaches, community members, etc. But in the meantime, we have to remember that this is a side thing for people. This is something they do because they enjoy it, and if they aren't enjoying it, they're not going to be doing it anymore. So, yeah.
I think I absolutely agree with what you just said. And I think depending on the person, the research to get to know your community, I say research, but really you're just kind of like trying to like figure things out with regards to like your community. I think it's very both difficult and kind of like a challenging thing that, like, for example, like I would love to have the results too, but do I have like the determination and effort to figure all of that out? It's very unclear to me. Like I think I would need like a team of people to go through and kind of help me understand how to go about this sort of thing. And I'm so glad that you pointed that out, because I did talk about a lot of things just now, and I think that what you brought back is like understanding your community. That's like one of the most vital things, because everyone has a different image of how collegiate should be at their given university. And as far as like other things go, I guess I wanted to highlight a few other means of like community meetings. I know that during my time as the TESPA chapter leader for DePaul, the way in which TESPA oriented their meetings was, I believe they had like a voice call, kind of like similar to what DePaul does, where they share a presentation, but then they have like an open Q&A at the end, which I think could be like very, very helpful, especially since everyone's there, able to ask questions in voice and kind of just go through like an agenda of questions that people might have. And this could help with like something like EGF too, right? Where like people might have questions about tournament organization and so on. And then as far as there's another organization that is an Overwatch organization that I've been a part of, and they just like host like full out it's called the Kaiju Corp, and they just host like full out like, okay, here, everyone meeting right here, if you're available, come by. And it's just like 40 people on a call, one person talking, and then just like a fun conversation at the end. And I think everyone has their own kind of way of approaching the community meetings, and all of them, as long as you put a good amount of thought into it and continue to change them as you learn more, I think that's like the proper kind of avenue to take it down.
And my last point is, if you are one of the community leaders, don't be discouraged, because there's a lot of walls that you're going to hit, and a lot of people with a lot of opinions that are not going to be afraid to share them. So always take those in stride, and remember that there are a lot of other people going through the same kind of challenges. So if you look on Twitter or in your Discord communities, or anywhere else that you're interacting with those types of folks, you can always ask for advice, because someone out there has definitely experienced the same type of problem. They probably have some ideas that might get you moving in the right direction, and your community will be all the better for it. And having cool conversations like we're doing right now are always a great opportunity. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
#ad.
Well, panelists, Tyler, Tom, Kason, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. For our viewers, I think have a couple more of these EGF lead sessions, so be sure to tune in the upcoming weeks as we round out the series. You can also find all of the videos on demand at the EGF YouTube channel if you want to catch up on past topics. We've talked about things like diversity and equity in esports, marketing, building PC demos, all sorts of different things. So be sure to check them out. But with that in mind, the last plug I'd put in, if you aren't aware, EGF is hosting the league championships this weekend. So be sure to tune in to twitch.tv/official EGF. But until next time, we hope you all stay safe. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks so much. Bye.